Welcome back, friend. Tonight we go to Northumbria, year 793, to Lindisfarne, jumping the holy island of St. Cuthbert, where the Anglo-Saxon chronicle whispers of fiery omens and the sea prepares a harder truth. A rune Latin ledger has vanished from the abbey's treasury, a book that maps tides and sandbars in a way that could steer longships straight to the monks. If we fail to find who wrote it and where it went before the first flood tide after dawn, lives and sacred knowledge may be swept away, and other monasteries marked next. I am Snorelock Holmes, the calm detective who walks history's sharp edges so you can rest. Before sleep takes you, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. Breathe softly now. I'll carry the weight of the mystery for you. Chapter 1. Rain, a tide clock, and a raven of wax. The rain began as a gauze against the window and then pressed its palm to the glass. My tide clock hummed in the corner, a quiet brass heartbeat set against the evening. Penelope, my brown and white deagle, had arranged herself into a warm comma at my slippers, sighing the way only old dogs and contented detectives do. On the desk, the replica of a page from the Lindisfarne Gospels shone with patient colour under a shaded lamp. In a small dish, sea glass waited like cool sugar. Beside it, a dark fleck of birch tar held the ghost of a shoreline if you warmed it between your fingers. I was calibrating the tide clock by candlelight, aligning the moon phase to a North Sea chart when the knuckles came. 3 knocks, urgent, close enough together to be one long sound. Penelope's ear flicked. I slid the bolt and opened the door to a man whose coat had become a river. He had the look of someone outrun by weather, cheeks raw, eyes bright with the last of his will. He placed a leather-wrapped parcel in my hands and whispered, "For the quiet one," as if the night itself were listening. Then his knees went soft. I guided him in. He collapsed onto the mat with the grateful thud of a load set down. Rain hissed on the threshold. I shut the door and set the parcel on the desk, the leather leaving a dark oval where the water had pooled. The man's breath was ragged but regular. He had salt crust on his wool as if the sea had dried there in lace. The cuffs smelled of pitch-sharp, smoky sweetness of birch made to seal seams and jars. Under his collar, grit sparkled like a dusting of stars. Mica, the kind that sits in the sand of certain shores and glints even on a grey day. "Easy," I said, my voice low, more for his benefit than mine. Panic is a poor tool for a detective or a courier. I lifted him gently and propped him against the settle. Penelope, generous in her old age, left the warmth of my slippers and lay by his feet, vouching for him without questions. The parcel was bound with a thong, dyed a warm reddish brown. Older bark makes that tint when you steep the leather long enough. The knot was simple but strong, tied by someone who trusts function over show. I cut it with a careful nick of my pocket blade and opened the wrap. The smell of river and old vellum rose up, a scent I've known in monasteries and ships' cabins and in the quiet drawers of scholars who keep pieces of the past like embers. Inside lay a single leaf of vellum, warped by water but resilient, its grain shimmering where the light hit the wet. Ink warped across it in 2 scripts, angular runes and neat Latin abbreviations, each line alternating with the other as if 2 hands were speaking in turns. In the lower margin, a circular diagram bloomed. tide rose with marks for lunar phases and a delicate sketch of sandbars that seemed to move even as you stared. To one side, a little drawing of a longship's dragon-prowed curved like a question mark against the edge of the world. A pea-sized fragment of black wax rolled out and clicked on the desk. When I pressed it back to the leather wrap, the device stamped in its face showed a simple bird with a beak like a sharp question. A raven. The tide clock ticked. It felt suddenly like a countdown. Dawn, tides, flats, Lindisfarne. A ledger that talks in two tongues. A raven stamped in wax. I knew the shape of the storm, even if I did not yet see the whole sky. The man on my floor stirred, his lips moved. The rain thinned for a moment, as if it too wanted to hear. Holy island, he breathed. Ledger, hide the tide leaf. Then sleep took him with that merciful heaviness that comes when a task is handed to another pair of hands. I leaned the vellum to the lamplight. Grains of mica dusted the margin, for no indoor scribe keeps such glitter on his table. Outside work, beach work. The alder-dyed thong matched the cut thread now frayed where it had been snapped. The break was new. The birch pitch scent told me the parcel had touched a boat recently, or a barrel sealed for the sea. And the runes spoke to someone who wanted northern eyes to read, while the Latin would be at home in any treasury in Northumbria or in the schools across the channel. It was a bridge book, I thought, a thing built for two shores, and it had been wrested from a chest somewhere near the sea. If my guess at the place was right, the chest lay within walls that held relics of St. Cuthbert and the shimmering Lindisfarne Gospels themselves. A holy place, and a tempting one. Wealth that fits in a hand, and wealth that fits in a memory. I looked at the tide clock again. It hummed its soft brass song. The pointer stood in the rising quarter, the hour creeping toward the flood that follows dawn. On some coasts, that is just a note in a sailor's day. On others, it is the window in which keels kiss sand and the world changes. Very well, I said to the quiet room, to the rain, to Penelope, to the courier asleep in the warm draught of my fire. We'll go to Lindisfarne. We'll find your ledger and the hand that wrote it, and we'll set the tide against whoever thinks they own it. Penelope thumped it tail once, an old soldier's agreement. Before I moved, I weighed the stakes aloud, because I find that truth spoken in a calm voice settles the mind. If this book times the sea for raiders, they will come with the tide after dawn, when the water lays a smooth hand over the flats. If we cannot interrupt that timing, or the knowledge that makes it sharp, relics will be taken, men enslaved, and a pattern will be set for Jarrow, for Iona, for every island house that thinks prayer alone is a wall. The vellum leaf shivered as a drop of rain fell from my sleeve and ran down the margin. The ink held, practical, durable, written to work at sea. I wrapped the leaf again in the leather, slid the raven waxed chip into the same fold, and looked once more at the courier. He slept, slack and safe for a few hours. He had done his part. Now the work was mine. Chapter 2. The courier's whisper and the sea in ink. I warmed broth over the small flame and held the cup under the courier's nose until the steam did the waking for me. He opened his eyes like a man who had fallen far and was surprised to find the ground so gentle. He drank, shaking, and colour came back to the rims of his ears. Holy Island, he said again, more clearly this time. The bishop, Higbald, a ledger of runes and Latin. Hide the tide leaf. They should not have it. The Ravensign has men here as well as there. He coughed, and I steadied the cup. What's your name? I asked. Doesn't matter, he rasped with a stubbornness I respected. Ball from the where, storm at the mouth. The man who gave me this, eyes like a gull always watching, said if anyone can untie a knot in a storm, it's the quiet detective in London. He paid for the boat and vanished in fog. He blinked, smelled like tar and alder smoke. You'll know what to do. He slept again, more easily. I set the cup down and turned to the desk. I laid the vellum leaf flat on clean cloth and let the lamplight travel over it. I do not squint. I let things come toward me at their own speed. The ink lines resolved into sense. First, the writing. The runes were angular, cut with a hand that had learned to scratch on wood and bone before it came to parchment. The Latin lines between them were in a continental style, Carolingian minuscule, the script favour at Charlemagne's schools because it was open and honest on the page. A scribe, trained there, or trained by someone who had been. That mattered. It meant the book could sit in a Frankish library or an English treasury and look like it belonged. Second, the diagram. The tide rose like a compass flower, but instead of cardinal points alone, it had small marks keyed to the moon. New, first quarter, full, last quarter. Beside each petal were tiny notations like teeth. Sandbars, shallows, the kind that stretch out from Lindisfarne like pale tongues when the water runs back and lie hidden when it comes forward. Lines linked the petals to a sketch that looked like coastline seen from a hill. It was not a sailor's exact chart, but it was enough to time a landing to the hour that would float a longship over danger and set it down within running distance of a church door. Third, the debris. Mica grains in the vellum's lower edge. If you have ever lifted a stone near the surf and watched the glitter come off on your skin, you know that feel. It does not come from an indoor scriptorium unless someone brings the beach to the desk. The leather thong was dyed with alder bark, a common dye near rivers and marshes. The cut ends told me it had been snapped in haste, not cut cleanly. The raven wax fragment carried a simple bird, stamped with a square edge that suggested a ring or a seal pressed straight on and lifted without twist. The leather wrap itself smelt faintly of birch pitch. Birch pitch is a resin heated and spread to seal seams, to glue ferrules onto hafts, to fix knots. You can taste the forest and the fire in its scent. If the wrap had brushed a boat's seam or a pitch jar, the smell would linger. All of that was the physical case. Then came the context, the map in my head that I share with you, not to alarm, but to let the facts do their work. Lindisfarne, Holy Island, lies off the coast of Northumbria. A tidal causeway binds it to the mainland when the sea pulls back and lets go when it returns. A 7th century monastery there kept the relics of St. Cuthbert and made books that glowed with colour and care. It was rich in portable treasure chalices, reliquaries, gospel books, the kind of wealth that fits under a cloak. And it had no walls a ship could not sail around. A few years before 793, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded that 3 ships of Northmen landed on the south coast in Wessex. The King's Reeve rode down to meet them. They killed him. That was 787, a small entry, but it meant this was not the first time sails from the north touched English sand. A Mercian charter in 792 spoke of pagan seamen, and you do not write that unless you have seen them. But Lindisfarne was a different kind of blow. It was not a trader's wharf or an official on a beach. It was a shrine, a seat of learning and prayer. When men from the sea break into such a place, people do not just count the loss in silver. They ask why God allowed it. Alcuin of York, a scholar at Charlemagne's court, wrote letters that still carry the shock. He spoke of dragons in the sky, in the Chronicle, and he searched for sins that might explain the wound. Whether you share his frame or not, you can feel how the raid shook people. It announced that longships could knock on a holy door and not wait for an answer. What makes longships deadly is not just the men who crew them, it is the hull. Shallow draft, meaning the part of the ship underwater is at deep, lets you slide over bars and into rivers. Speed lets you appear and vanish before a kingdom can rouse its men. If you add to that a clock that tells you when a certain sandbar will vanish under a certain moon, you have a blade sharpened to an edge. That is what sat on my desk. A page that spoke 2 languages, mapped tides by phases, and wore beach grit like a badge. Someone had crafted a ledger that straddled worlds, runes for Norse eyes, Latin for Christian treasuries. Hide it inside a monastery and you protect it until your men come. Or you plant it as a warning and fear does the work of storage for you. The courier's whisper was the last stitch.
Hide the tide leaf. If the tide leaf is missing, the book loses its bite. Without timing, a landing is guesswork. With it, the sea is your ally.
I looked again at the raven wax chip. In Norse hands, the raven is a standard. I know the name Eirik Hrovnsson from other nights and other pages, a young chieftain who wears a raven token and treats the sea as a road, not a barrier. Whether he stands at the edge of this page or simply sends men who bear his sign, the logic is the same. The first flood after dawn on 8 June 793 is the window. The ledger tells them how to slip through. The stakes were uncomplicated and heavy. If I failed, monks would die. Books piled for a century would be lifted in an hour. And the method, this ledger, this code of runes and Latin, would move from island to island, teaching raiders how to time the world. I slid the page back into its wrap. The tide clock's pointer ticked a hair forward. I had no more hours to spend on speculation. It was time to cross the threshold and work where the tide actually runs. Chapter 3. Smoke, Valerian, and the door in the fog. Accepting a case is like setting your keel at the river mouth. The current carries you once you point the bow. I dimmed the lamps until they were lion's eyes in a cave. I drew the curtains and listened to the rain make a soft drum of the sill. The courier slept. Penelope returned to her old watch at my feet, her breath slow and round. On the small dish, the fleck of birch tar waited. I warmed it between finger and thumb until its scent woke wood and smoke and a shadow of sweetness. I let that thread of forest pitch conjure a boat's seam in my mind, a rower's slow exhale, the hush of water against a long hull. I prepared my pipe. The bowl holds a mixture I reserve for work like this. Tobacco to anchor me. Valerian root to loosen the knot behind the eyes. poppy seeds in a whisper of a measure to soften the edges, and a dot of nightshade so small it sits within the light, not outside it. I tamped it with the care a surgeon gives a stitch. Then I lit it and let the smoke coil up, blue and orderly, each draw a metronome for the breath. I accept, I said to the quiet, because words make a shape even in the dark. We go to Lindisfarne, we find the ledger, we unmake its use. We keep as many souls and pages intact as the tide allows. The first breath filled the room with a soft bitterness. The second turned the lamplight into soft circles that overlapped and slipped. The third opened the floor an inch, just enough to let the sound of surf come up like a memory you choose and not one that chooses you. My chair, faithful as any companion, took my weight the way ships take waves, with a give and a return. My hands loosened on the arms, my jaw unhooked from the day. I set the vellum leaf on my lap and touched the margin where the mica glinted. The glass in the window trembled once, and the rain's hiss became the slow comb of a tide through grasses. The trick is at force. You do not push the door. You let the fog decide it is time, and you are welcome. The smoke softened the edges of the room until the bookcase was a line of dark rocks in mist. The tide clock became a bell rope moving in a draught. The hearth's tick turned into the drip of a cave where the sea had been a patient mason. Breath by breath, I felt the details shift their names. The rug under my boots traded wool for worn flagstone. The lamp ghosted into a tallow candle with a fat tear of wax running down its side. The smell of birch tar braided with the scent of damp wool and salt, and underneath it, the quiet animal note of leather thrummed by years of handling. My mantra is simple: tides and time, time and tide. I said it in my head in the slow cadence that carries sleep toward purpose. Tides and time, time and tide. The pipe's ember glowed, dimmed, glowed, like the lung of a sleeping house. When the fog decided, it came kindly. The chair became a wooden settle, familiar to any guest cell in a monastery where hospitality is a rule, not an extra. The leaded pane at my side clouded and cleared with a wind that knew salt. A bell rope quivered in a corner, the fibers rough, the knot worked by many hands at many hours. I lifted my eyes. The candle guttered and then steadied. The room had changed its language without changing its grammar. Stone walls, lime-washed. A bed with a straw mattress and a rough blanket folded with care. A small cross carved into the beam above the door, the kind a tired monk cuts on his way to bed to tuck the day in. A table set with a loaf end, a wooden spoon, and a pitcher with a crack mended by pitch. Outside, the dark was not the thick city night, but the open coastal pre-dawn that always feels like a held breath. I stood, and the settle creaked in a note I recognized from other islands, other cells. The floor had the cool of stone that has known 1,000 bare feet. I crossed to the door and opened it to a corridor, where the air moved with a dampness that belonged to the sea. A thin light lay on the horizon like a blade laid flat. The island's flats gleamed with a skin of water, and the causeway toward the mainland shone wet, a road only the tide can write and erase. Somewhere, a curlew called, its note a question bent into a song. The air smelled of kelp and cold iron. In the courtyard, a figure in a brown habit moved with the small steps of someone not yet fully awake. Bell ropes hung with a tiny tremble, as if the building itself were nervous. The scriptorium's door stood ajar, and I caught the paper-dry whisper of a page turned, and the fainter sound of a quill lifted and set down again. I set my hand against the stone and felt it hold the night's chill. I listened. No alarm, only the ordinary early hour of a monastery that would soon ring matins. But beneath it, the tide moved, and with it the window that had brought me here. The first flood after dawn. The ledger would matter soon. Time and tide. Lindisfarne, I said softly, more greeting than claim. The name tasted like salt and ash and faith and fear. I tucked the leather-wrapped leaf into my coat as if it belonged there, as if I were always meant to arrive with a raven's chip of wax and a page that worked like a clock. I took a slow breath, felt the steadiness that comes when a plan meets the ground, and stepped into the dim cloister with the calm of a man who understands, better than most, that danger can be precise. And so can hope. Chapter 2. Teeth on the Horizon. Salt hung in the air like a quiet bell. Dawn was only a rumour at the edge of the flats, a pale wash that made the pools shine and the eel grass glisten as if someone had polished the island during the night. I stood in the guest house doorway of Lindisfarne and breathed in brine, kelp, and the cold iron of wet stone. The wind was light from the east. It brought the faint slap of water against a boat somewhere unseen, and the distant rustle of curlews worrying at the tide line. Behind me, a rope quivered along the corridor and into the rafters, bell fibers rubbing softly. The entire monastery felt as if it were holding its breath. I stepped across the yard to the scriptorium, a long hall with shutters still closed against the night. Inside, the smell was warm and human. Vellum, oak ghoul ink, the faint tallow of candles used and snuffed. A monk's hand turned a page with a papery whisper that was somehow louder than it should be. "Brother," I said, keeping my voice low. He glanced up, startled, then smiled with quick courtesy. "Peace." A quill trembled in his fingers. "Matins in a little while. The brothers in the choir have been up and down all night. Portents." He grimaced at his own word, as if superstition had climbed into his mouth without permission. "Portents can wait," I said. "Facts first." Out by the causeway, the sand lay wet and silver. A novice passed with a basket of kindling, stopped, turned, and shaded his eyes with his sleeve toward the rim of the sea. "Do you see it?" he asked the air, or himself. Another brother, older, joined him and squinted into the pale distance. "Like teeth," the older man murmured. "Dragon heads." He tried to make his voice steady and failed by a hair. I stepped to their side and followed their gaze. At first, there was only a seam where sky met sea. Then there were notches in the seam. They did indeed look like teeth prows, with carved heads that northern crews used to dress their ships for war and luck. They were too far away to count precisely, far enough that panic would waste itself before they arrived, close enough that thinking was now a moral duty. "The tide?" I asked. The older brother pulled his sleeve down over his hand in a modest habit and rubbed his wrist bones. "Think. Turning. Fills after dawn. They will want the flood to lift them. They will want it near its height to scoot over the bars. They always do. if they are clever. He shook his head. But how would we know what they do? Because you read the same sea they read, I said, and left them with that small truth to hold on to. I made for the treasury at once. The door stood open, and not by chance. Inside, dim light pooled around an iron-bound chest near the wall. Its straps were raw with fresh gouges. Whoever had been here last was in a hurry but professional. On the chest lip, a dull smear caught the light black resin that smelled faintly of smoke and trees. Birch pitch. I drew a fingertip through it and rubbed it between finger and thumb. The grit in it told me it was old stock, warmed to loosen, then hastily used. On the slate floor, a thread lay out of place, dyed a soft reddish brown. I pinched it and held it to the window. Alderbark dye, modest, local, reliable. I placed it on a blank corner of my sleeve, like a marker on a board. At my knee lay a scrap of parchment, torn on the diagonal. Its corner bore the tiniest impression of a raven, pressed not with a heavy seal, but with something small and portable. A wax stamp you could pass across a table and tuck into a pocket. I let the world go quiet. A chest forced open. A resin smear from pitch-stuck fingers. A dyed thong thread broken in the rush. And the raven again. The same mark as the fragment left in my London study. I turned the scrap over. The handwriting made my mouth settle into a line. Runes marched in one column, and in the other, neat Latin abbreviations, Carolingian strokes, clear and modern for the time. The same restless marriage, the same hand, if it the same scribe, then a trained twin. Brother, I called softly. A figure appeared at the threshold, as if my voice had fetched him from the wall. He was slight, nearsighted, and already carried the guilt that comes from being responsible for everything with no power to stop anything. I am Herefrith, he said. Librarian, treasurer. His eyes flicked to the chest, to my fingers, to the resin on my skin. You expected this? I said gently. He swallowed. I feared it. I prayed against it. I hid and catalogued and counted and... His voice, raspy now, he drew it back under control as a man reins a skittish horse. I woke early and found the door ajar. The chest was forced. A book is missing. The ledger, I said. Your warning from the north. He nodded once. And something else, perhaps. A small wallet of leaves. I cannot be sure. I never fully... He closed his eyes. Forgive me. When I first saw it this winter, I feared it was a trick for the vanity of our scriptorium. Runes, Latin. Such ambiguity wants to be admired. I locked it away and told only the bishop. He has enough troubles. I should have burned it. Books burned do not always stay dead, I said. Sometimes they return as smoke in other men's lungs. He grimaced at the image and gestured for me to follow. There's something else. He led me behind the chest and reached into the shadow between chest and wall. When his hand emerged, it held a small whalebone stick, worn to a satin smoothness by handling. On its broad side, runic numerals marched in a clean line. Along the edge, someone had scratched Latin initials: Lind, Jar, Ion, Lindisfarne, Jarrow, Iona. Found there, he said. Just now. I ran my fingernail over the marks. The runes were cut with a clean tool by a steady hand. The Latin initials by someone who had learned to write on a different kind of day, Monk's Day, a clerk's day. The two hands were often friends in the world of merchants who cared less for purity than for clarity. And this, Herefrith added, passing me a folded scrap. It was a piece of parchment in continental hand, recent and tidy. The script was Carolingian minuscule, the clear school hand of Frankish reformers. A few words only. Dorestad, northern freight, wax weights, cloth, numbers. A list to be accounted for later. So, I said, someone is moving goods and information between this coast and the mouths of great rivers to the south. They carry Latin in their pocket for customs clerks and runes in their head for shipmates. He sagged onto a stool. And they carry our fate in a codex we failed to interpret. Outside, the light leapt a little, as if a shiver ran through the sky itself. The novice returned and stood in the doorway, his face strangely calm now that fear had a shape. "The line grows," he said simply. I pocketed the tally stick, the raven-stamped scrap, and the alder thread. "Bring me to Bishop Higbold," I said, "and then we will visit your chest again." In the bishop's chamber, the air felt heavier with thought. A wooden cross hung against the stone. A plain crozier leaned in a corner. Bishop Higbold's fingers were stained with ink. His eyes were the kind that could hold two truths, divine and practical, without letting either blur. He listened as Herefrith confessed every detail he could gather, and then looked to me. "If these men are guided by prophecy," he said, "we must pray. If they are guided by cunning, we must also think. Which is it?" "It was never a choice," I replied. "You will pray, I will think, and together we will move faster than either alone. The chest still speaks. Let me listen to it a little longer." He nodded. "You have this island's trust for this day," he said, and drew a slow breath that made his shoulders settle rather than lift. "Use it to save souls and what is needful to carry the faith forward." We returned to the treasury once more. I laid out the clues on the chest lid like a liturgy. Alder thread, pitch smear, raven scrap, tally stick, continental account. The ledger's absence was the loudest voice in the room. But absence is only silence if you don't know how to hear it. If a raiding party had taken the whole codex, they wouldn't have forced the chest inside the monastery before dawn. They would have snatched by night or taken men hostage. This was quick work by an advance hand, someone sent to grab a specific leaf or packet before the main force arrived. The raven stamp on the scrap said as much. "Brother Herefrith," I said, "you told truth when you kept the book from the copyists. Shame dies in the light. It's time to bring it into the open. With your bishop's leave, I will put something into the chest that those men expect to find. And it will be what they deserve to find." I spoke very softly, not from fear, but because soft words make men lean in and listen. He waited for me to explain. A bell rope stirred again in the rafters, and the light grew imperceptibly. "First," I said, "we must meet the tide on its own terms. Then we will draw a map that lies convincingly. And when a raven shows his beak, we will have something to feed it." Chapter 5, in which a librarian admits a winter secret brother. Herefrith led me to a small alcove off the scriptorium where light slid down a stone slit and pooled on a table cut by knives and stained by 100 images and psalm headings. He closed the door. The world softened. I could hear my own breath change. "In winter," he began, hands folded, eyes lowered as if the table were a confession stool, a sailor knocked at our gate. He had frost in his beard and ice in his eyes. He could not speak right away. We gave him ale and heat. When his words thawed, he said he was no thief, no renegade, only a messenger sent south by men who had learned the shape of this coast by taste as much as by sight. What did he bring? I asked. A codex in a sea wallet, Hearfrith said. Not a gospel, not a life of a saint. A ledger, if you could call it that. A book made of knowledge someone had no right to possess, and yet did. It held tide wheels, like roses but with teeth and moons. It listed sandbars like old friends. And it named us and others, Lind, Jar, Iona. Not as communities, but as waypoints. He swallowed hard. He told me he bore a warning for the house of Cuthbert, that men of the north had a map devil-crafted by greed, and that we should hide the book from them because they would come to claim it. Sooner for us than for Iona, since our sandbars make a better lesson. What was his price? Hearfrith's mouth twitched. A burial for a brother lost at sea. But he had no body to show, only a name on the wind. So, I said, feeling the shape of the scam, he asked you to keep it safe from them. Yes, he pressed his fingers into the table's gouges. And I did, mind you. I locked it in this chest you saw. I told no one except the bishop, and I studied it a little, but it made me unclean to touch it for too long. The runes were too sharp, the Latin too neat. It was as if two men were speaking in one throat. I know hands, Master Holmes. I copy the Gospels. I can smell a faulty pen nib across the room. The hand that wrote the runes is precise, a carver's hand. The hand that wrote the Latin is trained in the schools of the Franks. The same width of nib, the same ink recipes, and yet two educations in the same wrist. You think one scribe learned two scripts, I said, or two scribes worked together to make a book that could pass through both worlds? He nodded. Either way, it was meant to be read by sailors and understood by clerks, and to be locked in our strongest box. It boasted of the tide, as if it were a friendly beast that would come when called. I opened my palm to show him the whalebone tally stick. This was behind your chest. He leaned in, relief lighting his face at the sight of something plain. A tally, he said with some of his normal voice returning. We use them at the fish stalls. But that one, those numerals are runes. And the Latin? I asked, turning the edge to show him the alphabetical scars. Initials, Lindisfarne, Jarrow, Iona. He touched the letters as if greeting old friends in a crowd. Whoever held this was counting more than fish. Visits, deliveries, or planned raids. He forced the word, tasted it, and did not spit it out. I unfolded the continental parchment he had given me. Dorestad, I read. Northern freight, wax and cloth. Numbers that read like fields in a ledger. Hearfrith nodded, eyes narrowing in concentration. Dorestad is a market on the Rhine's mouth. Many of our books travel that way to the continent. Traders pass with wax, incense, cloth, glass. Sometimes with saints' bones wrapped in care, sometimes with news, rumors. He stopped, realizing what he would say, and corrected himself. Not our relics. Nick Fetrick Sekord, St. Cuthbert. But you take my point. I do, I said. A man who knows Dorestad's clerks knows how to smile in Latin and how to haggle in the language of coin. A man who knows how to put a longship on a bar tomorrow morning cannot waste time teaching his helmsman Latin abbreviations tonight. So the book had to speak both. A bell clinked once somewhere, not the full call to office, only a throat clearing by the rope as wind teased it. The light in the slit brightened a fraction. "Tell me about last night," I said. Here Frith breathed in and emptied himself of detail like a steward counting heads. Compline ended. The rain set in. I checked locks. I checked the chest. It was sound. I put the key under my pillow. A poor hiding place. But the keys live in flesh or in a belt pouch when danger speaks. And I dared not carry both. I slept. I woke as if kicked in the soul. The door was ajar. The key lay under my pillow still. The chest straps were split, pried. I don't know how they entered without the key, but iron cannot keep a careful man out, as you know. He lifted his shoulders and let them fall. Inside, a smear of resin. The idea of a book left in a chest overnight was proud, and pride is always punished. "You also found this behind the chest," I said, tapping the tally. "Yes. Fallen in the rush, or placed by someone who wanted me to know the path of their visits. It was jammed where floor meets wall. I had to lever it out." "Good," I said. "And the scrap with the raven?" His face changed. "That was not there then. I did not see it until you held it up." "What does it But the men who took the ledger wanted to assure someone far from this room that their instructions had been followed and the leaf recovered," I said. "A stamp is a promise to a master who trusts tools more than men." He leaned back, his voice steadied. "Then we are not cursed by dragons or demonic winds only. We are browsed by merchants with swords. Men with accounts," I agreed, "some of them in Latin." A step sounded outside the door. It paused, then continued. I lifted a finger. Herefrith waited. Silence returned like a small bird hopping back onto a branch after a fright. "Brother," I said, keeping my tone soft but firm, "we have a deadline. After dawn, the flood will make this island and unmake it as easily. Longships love a lift. We will love the lull between slack and full. Oswulf the fisher, we will need him. He knows the hushed channels. We will also need your hand and eye." "My hand shakes," Hereth said, holding it up. "It shakes from fear now," I said. "Later it will shake from ink. One is a weakness. The other is a craft. Let us invite the second to swallow the first." He nodded, then took a breath, and I saw a man returning to himself 1 inch at a time. We stepped back into the cloister. A young monk crossed himself in a hurry and gripped a bucket so tightly his knuckles shone. At the far end, Bishop Higbold stood near a west-facing window and watched the sky. When he turned, his face was grave, his mouth pressed into a line of measured resolve. "Bishop," I said, "we will need a copy of a thing you lost, but not the truth of it. A mirror misleading enough to catch a raven's eye, but convincing enough to use without thinking. And we will need coracles and quiet men to move what must be moved through the slack paths. Are you willing?" "My willingness is irrelevant," he said with weary kindness. "Duty is all. Tell me what to do and whom to trust." "Herefrith," I said, "and Oswulf the fisher, and any brother who can carry a book without jarring it." "A plan," he said, lifting his chin a degree. "Yes." As if in answer, a squall threw a handful of rain at the shutters and moved on. The island inhaled again. We began to lay out tools: pen, knife, pumice, ink. The smell of oak gall sharpened. Herefrith sat, steadier now, and pulled a clean scrap of parchment to him. I laid the vellum leaf from my waking world alongside the space where his copy would be born. Its tide wheels stared back at us like an eye. He rolled his shoulders once and lowered the nib. "Work clean," I said, "and work wrong. Wrong will save us." Chapter 2, in which silent feet and a bronze raven move through the church. Matins began and then splintered. A bell struck 2 clear notes and then fell mute as a brother stumbled into the choir. "Shapes," he gasped. "Low. Near." His eyes showed whites all around, as if they were also all pupil. The elderly monk at the rope had the sense to stop pulling. Noise signals panic. Panic makes fools of us all. "Move as if asleep," I said quietly to Hifrith at my side. Soft feet, slow breath. We slid along the wall into the side aisle of the church. The nave was dim, lit by a few lamps that made islands of gold on stone. Between those islands, darkness. The smell was beeswax and damp wool and a ghost of incense. The outer door whispered and then sighed open. Heavy boots did not follow. Soft leather soles did. Men who wanted to come close to eyes that were looking the wrong way. A small Norse party padded in, their blades sheathed to keep the scabbards from clacking. They spread in a practiced fan the way rain spreads in a puddle. One moved down the central aisle, 2 hugged the columns. A 4th hung back near the doorway, hand resting on the wood, feeling its grain as if a door's age might tell him something useful about what lay behind it. I watched the lidman's silhouette. In low light, people reveal their training. He walked like a helmsman when he is on land, balanced invisible lines from foot to eye. On his chest, a leather wallet rested against his tunic, tied with a cord. At his neck, a small bronze disc glinted, a raven stamped in profile. The metal had been rubbed by thumb and time until the lines were quiet and smooth. He paused near the chancel, where an open coffer of vestments and plate was kept during service. He was not here to steal by the armful. His gaze flicked, measured, and dismissed. He was here for something already stolen, knowledge, not cups. I slid 1 foot forward until my soul just kissed the shadow of a column. He passed within arm's length and looked through me as if I were an alcove. It is hard to see what you do not expect. I let my ribs move only enough to keep life in them. Behind him, the man near the door opened his palms slightly, and a waxy glint showed in the lamplight edge of a small seal, a habit. These men kept tokens to mark compliance, to stamp notes, to satisfy a commander who might never set foot where his orders fell. Then the door guard tucked it away and continued listening to the stone as if it were whispering back. The helmsman leader reached into his leather wallet, fingers moving as if counting beads. He produced a fold of vellum, unfolded it, and tilted his head to read its lines in the poor light. The marks on it were precise and ugly, in the same way all practical drawings are ugly. They put function above grace. Along one edge, a wheel glimmered in the lamplight. A tide rose, spokes, petals, all the little moons ticked around a circle. Along the other, short strokes of runes. I knew the hand. The ledger was not prophecy, it was procedure. He put the vellum back, and I caught another detail where the fold opened. A smudge of black along the edge of the leaf. A charred, resinous sheen. Birch pitch, as on the chest lip. The same agent, the same hand. He gave a finger twitch that said what words would have if words were safe. Nothing here now. Move. The three men withdrew with the same care they had entered, but their care carried a different meaning now. They had learned what they needed, or, more exactly, they had confirmed. The chest was burst. The token leaf, or the tide instructions they wanted, were in their wallet. The rest was for later, when the big boats pulled close and the long blades came out. We waited. The door closed with a soft warmth. I let my lungs finish the breath they had started a minute ago. Did they see us? Herefrith asked. They saw only what they brought in their heads, I said, which is often enough to make a man blind to anything new. We stepped to the door and out into the cloister. A spatter of rain swept the flags and passed. I looked to the sea. The tetches were larger now. Masts did not litter the horizon yet. These were still a few scouts or the first noses of the pack. The full force would wait at a distance for a signal. The flood after dawn would lift them when their helmsman told them so. Eirik Ruffinson. He would be out there somewhere, not yet ashore. A raven at his neck, a banner furled to keep it quiet until it needed to fly. Herefrith, I said, do you have spare vellum, a legal hand on sight, and the humility to copy the thing you hate most? I have vellum, he said. I have a hand. As for humility, today it will serve where pride has failed. We returned to the scriptorium, and I laid the delivered leaf beside him. He studied it in a quick, business-like way, now that fear had a job to do rather than simply circle his spine. I can mimic this hand, he said, but I cannot love it. Good, I said. Love is needed. Accuracy is needed, and then inaccuracy. You will mirror the wheel. You will invert the compass points. East will be west, and the moons will tick one petal too late. A pilot who trusts his leaf will kiss sand sweetly, and sit there wondering why the water has grown stubborn. He blinked at the cruelty of it, and nodded. Ink, oak gall with just a hint of soot, I said, and there is a smear of birch pitch on the chest. Take a flake and warm it. Touch it to the edges of the leaf with your finger and wipe it with a cloth that has seen hands. It must smell right when a northern nose checks if it's been used. We set to work. He sketched the circle light with a knife, pricking the guide points the way a good scribe does when laying out difficult geometry. He drew the spokes. He lettered the flawed compass. He added runes he didn't understand, and I corrected with what I had learned from the vellum fold and from the tally on the whalebone stick. Runic numerals beside the spokes, wrong by one. Enough to be plausible, deadly to a pilot's pace. The world narrowed to breath and point and line. Out in the yard, I heard sandals scuff and the quiet dip of a coracle's paddle in a cistern, where a brother practiced the motion he would need later without anyone noticing what he was doing. Calm is an art. Practice under cover is part of it. When the leaf was finished, I held it up to the light. It looked like nothing to a soul who had not lived at sea. To a sea mind it sang. The pitch along the edge smelled right. Herefrith's hand shook now, only because we had asked it to mimic another soul's cadence, which is always fatiguing. I folded the decoy leaf in thirds, the way the helmsman had folded his, then rubbed it along the edge of a windowsill to soften it. I rubbed it across a monk's wool sleeve when he wasn't looking, to give it the grime of use. Herefrith blanched at the sacrilege. I raised a palm. "Forgive me, brother," I said, to the sleeve and the man. The sleeve forgave at once. The man took an extra heartbeat. We placed the leaf in a leather wrap. I brushed its edges with resin until my fingers stuck, and then released with a little tug, just as the helmsman's had. I tucked a thread of alder into the thong, so it would look as if it had snagged on a splinter when a man grabbed for it in hurry. Then we walked, slow as sleepwalkers, back to the treasury. I laid the decoy in the chest, not buried, not obvious, visible the way a guilty thought is visible on a face if you know where to look. I set the lid down and left it unlatched just enough to be interesting to a hand that couldn't resist. I pressed my palms to the wood and felt its grain. It would speak to the first man who touched it. Come and see. At the doorway, Bishop Higbold met us with a man whose feet seemed most comfortable bare, and whose eyes were half squints from years of reading reflections on water, not ink on vellum. Oswulf, the fisher, nodded once, taking in the room with a completeness that is rare and useful. "Tide," he said by way of greeting. "High after sunrise. There is a hush channel between here and Innerfarne. It is thin as a whisper and must be taken when the tide is breathing in, but not yet full. If you want to carry heavy relics and men with stiff joints where nobody sees, it is the path." "That's the path we need," I said. "How many trips?" "As many as you give me, brothers, for," he said. "But slow is quiet, and quiet is survival. Better to send first the old, the precious, the written. Fish later." Herefrith looked at the bishop. "St. Cuthbert's relics," he said, the words half a question, half an oath. The bishop's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once, consent dragging a furrow across his brow. "We do not leave the saint to teach a lesson about fatalism," he said. "We carry him to teach a lesson about prudence." I felt the island's spine lengthen. We had a map that lied for us. We had a path that told the truth to our feet. We had men who could carry weight without clatter. And we had time, not much, but enough to widen into what we needed if we handled it like glass. "Signals," I said. One thin line of smoke from the west window means go now. 2 lines means delay by 1/4 of an hour. Oswulf, you will not move without that line. Herefrith, you will stay with thee until your second copy is ready. "Second copy?" he said, surprised. "Insurance," I replied. "If the first decoy is seized, we may need to tempt them with a second bait should they look further. Or we may need to show Eirik Hrafnsson something particular to set his eyes just slightly aside from what matters most." At the name, both Bishop Higbold and Oswulf made small faces. Recognition mixed with the steady distaste one reserves for a problem one has to understand to solve. "You know his name," the bishop said. "A raven banner," I said, touching the token at my memory's throat, "and a quiet way of walking in a church. He leads, but he is a man of tantrums. He measures, and he moves. Those are the kind who talk if there is something to be gained by it. Buy time," Higbold said. Yes, we were already spending it carefully. Chapter 7, in which tide, tar, and tally speak plainly. We retreated to the guest house, not as soldiers, but as men who needed a roof and a table to thick. Rain began to whisper on the thatch, with a sound like quills skipping across thousands of pages in a library I could almost see. The world shrank to the room table, coals, 3 faces, and the arrangement of a plan that had to be made of simple parts because complicated plans break themselves before enemies can break them. I laid the clues on the table in a neat line, as if placing words in a sentence. The older dyed thread, the smear of birch pitch scuffed with grit, the raven-stamped scrap, the whalebone tally stick with its runic numbers and Latin initials, and the continental parchment that smelled faintly of foreign smoke and shop-warmed wax. "Let's let them talk," I said. "Thread," I began, and touched the older dyed fibre, "is the small honesty men leave when they lie in haste." The thong that held a packet tore when the chest strap scraped it. It tells us the packet was leather and tied. The pitch smear agrees. It is the glue of the sea. You use it to seal seams and patches. It goes sticky when warmed by a palm. Our thief's fingers told our chest what he had been doing. I turned to the scrap. "This," I said, "is a token left for reassurance." The raven stamp echoes the little bronze disc our scouting friend wears at his throat. An army is a bureaucracy when it wishes to be efficient. These men want proof their agent did what was ordered. I held up the tally stick. "Here," I said, "is the shape of the network. Runes to count, Latin to name. Lind, Jar, Ion. The North's lighthouse monasteries turned into coordinates. Whoever cut this, not a monk, not a pure Norseman, but someone who is both and neither, wanted to be understood in 2 languages without stopping to translate." I flattened the Carolingian scrap, and this is where the world ties together. Dorestad is not a myth. It is a market city, busy, muddy, and very fond of good handwriting. Their clerk accepts cargo manifests. There a trader tallies wax and cloth. There you can buy a book and a barrel. There you can stand between a Christian altar and a pagan dock without moving your feet. I paused. Rain deepened and then thinned. The room breathed with us. "A man or men," I continued, "have gathered practical intelligence about this coast. Sandbars, inlets, how the light falls on the flats at different moons. They write it down in a hybrid script so a Norse helmsman can read the runes and a continental clerk can recognize the Latin. They package it as a warning and deliver it to monasteries that will, of course, lock a dangerous thing in their strongest box. Then agents retrieve it when the tide of fear swells and the opportunity comes. It is a plan that uses our own caution against us. Bishop Higbold soaked the logic in like a parched man swallowing water slowly to keep it down. A false prophecy, he said, a practical trap. Yes, I said, and now we turn it inside out. They rely on timing. Longships are obedient to tides. If we give them a leaf that is almost right but wrong where it counts, we move their landing window forward by minutes. And minutes are everything when a pilot is sliding over sandbars that hold like hands. We will buy the quarter hour Oswulf needs to ferry your most precious cargo into the Hush Channel. Oswulf had been silent, listening as he measured the rhythm of rain. He lifted his chin. 1 quarter will do if the sea behaves and the brothers follow me. 2 would be better. But I will take the 1. We will aim for 2 and be satisfied with 1. I said. Hifrith glanced at the window, where the world beyond blurred then sharpened between gusts. And if they realize the trick, they won't, I said, calm in the way only a worn truth can make you. Not because they are stupid, because they are trained. They trust the leaf the way you trust your memory for a psalm you have copied 100 times. They will notice the feel of the pitch, the fold of the vellum, the hand that is almost their own. They will not suspect a reverse compass until the keel kisses a bar. And then even a careful man will think the sea is punishing him for a sloppy approach. He will not think an enemy has moved his moon. Bishop Higbald nodded once, the nod of a man choosing a path he doesn't like but sees as necessary. "And the community?" he asked, voice low. "No alarm?" "They will hear the ships when they find their tongues." "No alarm," I said. "Alarms make men produce the wrong noise at the wrong time. Give your house tasks that sound like normal life. Matins. A procession that happens to lead toward the west window. Brothers moving books as if for cleaning. Brethren escorting the oldest to the guest house for warmth. The right thing done under a familiar name carries less fear." He absorbed that and then asked the question that good leaders always reach for. "What about those who can't be moved in time?" "We will hide what we cannot move fast," I said. "Not in places raiders look first. Not in chests, they break chests. In the bell tower under the rope coys. In the woodpile split, then sealed again with pitch so it looks like a log. Under reeds at the marsh's edge in a coracle turned upside down. Small caches where only a patient man would find them. Raiders may be plenty of things. Patient when the tide is going out is not one of them." Oswulf half smiled at that. "True as a mackerel," he said. I recapped, because weary minds like a list that they can own. We have a decoy leaf placed where greedy fingers can find it. We have a hush channel and a clock that is the moon. We have a signal. 1 smoke for go, 2 for delay. We have a quiet procession that is secretly an evacuation. We have hiding places that look like chores. And we have me, who will speak with Eirik Rafnsson and his pilot with a respect their pride cannot resist, offering them a gift that we have already poisoned. Silence sat with us for a while, companionable and serious, like an old dog who knows there's thunder coming, but trusts you to remember where the dry corner is. My mind turned again to the helmsman's wallet, to the raven disc, to the familiar smear of resin on his vellum. Information had crossed water for months to prepare for this morning. Now a small lie would ask the sea itself to hold for us. "Brother Hifrith," I said at last, "review your copy, not for beauty, for wrongness. Are all the compass points inverted? Did your numerals step off a beat? Is the tide wheel mirrored cleanly so a quick eye will miss the reflection and accept the face?" He checked. He found one rune that still told the truth. He scratched it out and replaced it with the smaller lie it needed to be. He closed his eyes briefly, mouth moving in something that might have been a prayer or a page of instructions to his own muscle memory. Then he exhaled. "Done," he said. "Good," I said. "Now rest your hand and make yourself useful at moving books. 2 brothers per gospel, bright covers inside, dull cloth outside. Keep chant on your lips so your feet find the pace." He smiled despite himself. You have read some rubric books in your time, he said. I read runes, I replied. Rubrics come free with the habit. We dispersed. The bishop took his cross and his authority and bent it toward Calm, murmuring tasks to one brother here, redirecting another there, drawing out panic like a splinter with the tweezers of ordinary duty. Oswulf drifted like a gull to a vantage where the sea told him something about itself that it doesn't tell landmen. I returned to the treasury and touched the chest again. It felt like a stage. I never like stages, but sometimes a stage is the only way to keep a play from turning tragic. I let my head rest against the cool stone and allowed myself the smallest luxury to list the reasons this would work. Reason 1. Men believe what they have handled before. Reason 2. The tide loves nobody and can be bribed by nobody, and in that fairness there is a predictability that is the detective's friend. Reason 3. Eirik prefers calculation to waste. He will choose the approach that promises ease over the slog that promises blood. That preference is a seam we can put a blade into. The rain lightened, the world brightened another shade. Time was advancing with a gentle, relentless hand. Chapter 8, in which we bait the ravens and count the breaths to flood tide. We threaded the monastery with tasks like beads on a string. 2 novices fetched drab clothes to wrap over bright covers. Brothers moved in pairs, each footfall a little drama turned into a practiced step. A single thin ribbon of smoke rose from the west window when Oswulf lifted 2 fingers to show that the hush channel had the right kind of dark to it. Though the dramatic sail away dark of storybooks, just the grey you need when you want the horizon to ignore you. Herefrith and I made one more pass through the scriptorium to choose the order of what to move. The Lindisfarne Gospels, of course, cradled as if a small boy were holding his sleeping sister. The book's jeweled cover had to be hidden, its light a liability for once. Close behind it, other precious volumes, then reliquaries that could be carried without shaking the bones and bits of sanctified wood inside. Brother choir leaders ushered the elders with soft hands. Youthful shoulders took the weight. No one should make an old man bare when the sea is waiting. Oswulf slipped into the courtyard and let his gaze run along the gutters, down the walls, across the yard, and out past the barn, as if he were reading a sentence and checking its grammar. Good, he said to the bishop. Your house is quiet. There's a pace to it. Keep that beat, and I can bring you boats along the inner path in 2 runs, if we don't dawdle. We do not dawdle, Bishop Higbold said, not as a threat, but as a vow made to himself. I returned to the treasury once more for the stagecraft. I propped the chest lid an inch higher, enough to invite fingers, not enough to make a careless monk shut it on reflex. I tucked the decoy leaf so that the alder thread peaked at the right angle. I rubbed my jaw and smelled the pitch on my fingers and wished for a moment that the sea did not require trickery, only honesty. But the sea is honest about its indifference. Men bring the tricks. Herefrith joined me with the second decoy. No tide wheel on this one, only small notes that repeated a mistake twice as false margins to lull an over-careful eye. In case, he said. In case, I echoed, and laid it where only a hand that could not resist rummaging would find it, under a cloth whose edge fell back as if flicked by habit. We stepped back and let the room breathe. There is an art to bait, a kindness even. You do not spit at the fish. You present it with something that looks like what it loves, and then you pull it just far enough off course to save what matters behind you. Cruelty is in the function, not the shape. A shout drifted across the flats, thin and distant. The line of teeth had thickened into a jaw now. Figures along the ridge of the shore pointed and then lowered their hands. A gull dipped. The tide, obedient to nobody's shouts, continued its slow inhale. Oswulf appeared again. "Time," he said simply. The bishop nodded and lifted 2 fingers to the west window. The brother stationed there fed a measured twist of damp kindling into the brazier. One line of smoke rose, clean, thin, obedient. In the cloister, nothing changed. Men continued their work at the pace of chant. The first coracle slid from behind the sheltering wall and disappeared as if it had been adopted by the colour grey. I turned my mind forward. Eirik Herfamsson would not walk to our gate with a waving blade. He would send a small hand again to fetch the decoy, then approach as far as his pilot could tell him was safe. He would walk in with 12 men, not because he needed 12 to fight, but because 12 men have 12 eyes and 1 leader to use them. He would measure the yard with his gaze the way a father measures a child's growth against a doorframe, not sentimental, just precise. "Herefrith," I said, "you will stand with the bishop when he receives them. Your face is one that tells the truth when it lies." Which is exactly what we need. Truth in small things so the bigger lie can ride free. He grimaced, but there was no reproach in it. "I eat it," he said. "That's why it will work," I replied. "Men who enjoy lying make knots in their own rope. You will keep it taut." He pushed air through his nose in something like a laugh. "And you? I will be the gentleman at the edge of the scene who speaks only when invited and then says something with enough salt in it to make a sailor thirsty." "You will give him the leaf," he said, meaning the decoy. "I will show him the leaf," I corrected, "and let him choose to take it. Pride will lift it out of my hand more cleanly than gift-giving will." We walked to the cloister and took our station. I stood just within the shadow of a pillar, my hands open, my posture loose. The bishop set his face in its natural calm, which is a rarer thing than most men realize. Herefrith arranged his habit as if he were about to teach a boy his letters and forced his breath to march in even columns. Another smoke twist, then another pause. The first coracle returned, low and quiet, and someone's shoulders sagged a fraction too much with relief. Oswulf hissed a careful warning, and the man pulled his breath back in line. A rustle ran along the yard. Though panic, only a ripple of attention. I turned my head and saw movement at the gate. The raven banner furled tight against the pole, so it would not snag or draw wind. Eirik Hrafnsson, not large, but carrying himself like a mast that had learned to ride swells without spilling the men beneath it. 12 behind him, balanced and unsentimental. Not a drunk among them, not a boy. He stepped into the light and let his eyes taste the room. He noticed the smoke with a flick of attention and dismissed it. He noticed the bishop's ink-stained hands, and did it mistake ink for weakness? He noticed me, and filed me as the man who would say something unhelpful later. He noticed the house's calm. "Bishop," he said in accented but serviceable Northumbrian, voice low. "Eirik Hrafnsson, out of the north. I come to speak before my men come to take." "Speak, then," Bishop Higbold said without moving his hands. "Your tide is kind today," Eirik observed. His pilot, a man with a nose like a beak and eyes like corners, stood a little behind his right shoulder, watching me as if I were an interesting reef. But a kind tide can turn on you if you don't know where it puts its teeth. The sea has never been sentimental, I said, stepping into the conversation as a stone slides into a stream and changes the current just enough. It loves nobody, but it can be read, and today's reading has peculiarities. I let the word hang where his pilot could see it and wonder. Eirik turned his head slightly to make room in his eyes for me. "You are not a cleric," he said, "and not a monk. But your coat looks like a man's who prefers counting to bleeding." "I count when counting saves blood," I said politely, "and sometimes when it doesn't, to make sure I know how much I have lost." He gave the smallest smile that acknowledged the shape of the thought without endorsing it. "You have something for me, little Count," he said. I enjoyed the name and kept it. "Not for you," I said. "For your helm. For the man who has to put your keel over a bar without losing face. A leaf he dropped last night looks better in this light." A correction. The shallows have shifted since winter. I kept my voice as casual as I could make it without deflating it. I didn't hold the decoy leaf out yet. A good fish moves closer to bait when it feels it has found it, not when it is pushed. His pilot's eyes sharpened. He stepped to the side to see the edge of the vellum I didn't yet show. He smelled the pitch on my hand and relaxed half a hair. Men of the sea know the smell of a thing before they trust the sight of it. I could almost see a thread tie his nose to the mark of tar along his own wallet leaf. Familiar is a cousin of trust. Eirik opened his palm slightly. Not a request, not a demand, an invitation to let him accept an offer he would later pretend he had not needed. I looked at the bishop. He inclined his head the slightest amount. The kind of permission a man gives when he knows a small compromise will keep a larger truth intact. I revealed the leaf, carefully, not fully. It flashed its wrong tide wheel and its wrong compass in the right hand. Eirik glanced only long enough to be sure it was what he thought it was. He looked instead to his pilot, who ran a finger along the pitch edge and traced one spoke and nodded. The nod said, "This looks like ours." "You give this," Eirik said. "I show," I corrected again. "The sea gives or withholds. You follow. I advise." "Advise, then," he said. "Do not take the standard cut over the outer bar," I said calmly enough that the words could have been part of a recipe. I pointed to the wrong line on the wrong wheel, so the right faux path would be walked. "Slide in 1 boat length east of your habit. Follow the moon mark here." I tapped the beatlate numeral. "Do not push at the first hold point. The second lifts you better. It has teeth like a small comb. If you push, you snag. If you relax, you glide. You need to arrive at the teeth when they are smiling, not when they are tight." His pilot's mouth did a small thing that sailors do when they are deciding whether to trust a stranger with their pride. The wind gusted, tugged the edge of the raven banner, then died. He nodded again, this time to himself. Eirik lifted his hand. "We will try your reading, little Count," he said. "If you waste me, I will take your tongue and give it to my gulls to teach them Northumbrian." "Gulls know more than you do," I said, "and less than you need. The tide speaks plain to them. It will speak plain to you if you listen." He turned and made a small sign to a man outside, and the ripple moved down the line to the shore. Boots turned, bodies shifted, the plan moved. I did not smile. Eirik did not either. We were two men who had agreed to let the sea judge us both. "Bishop," I said, very softly without turning my head. "Send the second smoke. Oswulf will know what it means." The bishop raised two fingers again. Two slender lines rose. The coracle men pushed off with the quiet of otters. Eirik glanced back once, as if to fix the angles of the yard in his memory. He only gave that yard the time he had to spare. Then he walked away, at a pace that bored the eye, which is always the right pace when everyone is watching and nobody should feel threatened. Yet, the yard resumed its slow dance, brothers drifting, wood stacked, bells silent. The tide moved toward the height it loved. I felt the plan's delicate web hold. A longship can do many things a cloister cannot, but it cannot cheat the exact minute when water and sand agree to let it pass. We had moved that minute half a beat. Sometimes that is the difference between a knife at a throat and a handshake that arrives late enough that both men forget how the conversation started. I rested my hand on the stone pillar. It was cool and patient. "Now," I said, almost to myself, "we will let them find the sand." And we waited at the edge of breath, just before the note begins, trusting the lie to do its quiet work while the truth of the tide stood ready behind it. Chapter 9, in which a raven reads the sea. Dawn went grey over Lindisfarne, the kind of light that has not decided yet whether it belongs to night or day. The wind had fallen to a murmur. I felt the island draw breath with the tide. The plan was simple, and simplicity is a comfort in danger. I would stand in the cloister and speak directly to Eirik Hrafnsson, Raven Banner chieftain. I would hold nothing sharper than my tongue and a single vellum leaf. Behind me, men and women moved like a tide of their own, a soft procession guided by Oswulf the fisher toward a hush channel only he had the patience to find. Brother Herefrith held the true tide leaf in his sleeve, close to the pulse in his wrist. Bishop Higbold walked with the elderly, the sick, and a wrapped reliquary that seemed to warm the hands that bore it. Every step was measured against a clock I could not see, only feel in the tug of water over sand. Boots touched stone at the far end of the cloister walk. Eirik Hrafnsson entered like a man weighing weather. He had the balance of a helmsman, knees easy, eyes narrow against glare. His raven banner was furled, not flapping. He had brought a dozen, no more. Their blades were seethed. Silence stretched as they stood under the low sky, breath steaming and then fading. Behind Eirik, a lean pilot with salt-cracked lips watched the eastern flats, all attention and little motion, like a gull on a pile. "Eirik Hrafnsson," I said, tone even. "This is Lindisfarne. 8 June 799. The flood you want is at the flood you think you have." I saw his mouth tighten, not anger, interest. He lifted his chin. "You speak like a pilot and carry no oar," he said in Old Norse. His English was rough, his Norse clear. I answered in English, my voice carried without strain in the stone space. "I carry a chart," I said, "and an offer that spares you time and sheds less blood than sand demands." I drew the decoy leaf from my coat. Salt crust had stiffened its edges. The ink, copied last hour by Herefrith, looked convincingly old because fear had steadied his hand into care. Your man who walked here last night with resin on his belt came for this. He was too early, too sure. He made noise when quiet was needed. He did not find it. Eirik stepped forward by two soft soles. He held out his palm without asking, as if it were his leaf by right. I laid it there. His thumb traced the circle of the tide rose. He glanced at the margin, where mirrored runes and Latin abbreviations ticked like a secret clock. His pilot leaned close. He did not snatch or brag. He simply read, and I liked him more for it. "What do you claim?" Eirik asked, in a calm that matched mine. "That these marks speak true of the shoals south of the priory walls. I claim that the sand teeth shift like wolves, and that the deep line is it's where a man, impatient for glory, thinks it should be," I said. "Your longships ride shallow, but not shallow enough to kiss those bars and rig it free before the sun lifts. If you lean on the wrong edge of the flood, you lose an hour, 2. And the men you send will slog through sucking flats to find not treasure, but stone and sighing wind." From the west transept window, a thin thread of smoke curled into the damp air. One plume only. The signal to go now. Oswulf would be pushing the first laden coracle into the hush channel. I did not look at it. Eirik did. He had a mariner's eye. He made no sign that he had seen, and I respected that. "What do you want?" he asked. I nodded toward the decoy leaf. "Take that line," I said, voice soft, "and you will do what you came to do more quickly and with less risk than sending men blindly across lures of sand. In return, you give me the useless paper you took last night from our chest and leave the old and unarmed who sit in that church unharmed. There is less honor in red water than in clean skill." He studied me. It was not theatrical. He simply weighed. He was young, but not foolish, and he did not enjoy waste. He took the decoy leaf to his pilot again. The man's fingertip moved over the mirrored compass, the leaned lines, the note of lunar phase. I had inverted the rose and mirrored the key. The pilot frowned, then slowly nodded, as if something he already half believed had just been confirmed. That was the hinge. "Very well," Eirik said. "We try your line." He raised one hand. A silent runner peeled away to the harbour path. Brother Herefrith exhaled a prayer behind a pillar. I kept breathing like a man measuring bellows, slow and consistent. Eirik's men waited, faces flat as the sea in calm. He remained in the cloister with me. The raven banner twitched once as a draught found it, then stilled again. Minutes stretched their limbs. The low tide lips sighed, then ticked forward. I could feel it in my toes like a shadow climbing a wall. From the causeway, a loose cough of gulls, then silence. Eirik's pilot cocked his head. "They go," he murmured in Norse. We heard it then, that the crash of keels, not yet, but the whisper of wood, through wet breath, the soft scrape of something very long and very old, moving over a patient, shallow body. The longship slid, oars barely kissing water. Helmsman, reading the small ruckles on the surface. They aimed for the line the decoy suggested, a sweet curve that looked deep because the flats were darker there when the cloud thinned. The mistake lay in the wheel. The mirrored rose pushed them half a turn too soon, across a bar that wore the memory of a winter storm like a fresh scar. It rose under the keel as if the earth had risen to meet them. A muffled thump came over the flats. One, then another, thinner as weight distributed. A voice carried, baffled more than angry. Oars scratched out, then paused. A gull laughed once and flew on, greedy for nothing. Sand teeth, I said, not unkindly. They hold when they feel your full weight. Iric's face did not change. He listened with his whole body. In that long quiet, the monks' procession moved. I could not see them. I did not need to. I knew the time it takes to cross a threshold with a casket, the time to settle a child in a coracle, the time to untangle a cord from a cleat when hands tremble. Oswald would have his knee out, bracing, eyes on the eddy that means depth. Bishop Higbold would be calm because other people needed him to be. Herefrith would watch me because what happens to me would tell him how to breathe. Eirik spoke at last. "You bargain with paper and the sea," he said softly. "And you think I will turn my men back for the sake of old men and a box of bones?" He did not say it cruelly. He said it to test the depth of what lay under my face. "You will turn because your time is worth more than a quarrel with mud," I said. "You will turn because stubbornness is a strength at sea. You will turn because whatever ledger sent you here will send you to Jarrow and to Iona and beyond if you keep your hulls dry and your men biting meat instead of sand. And because you are no fool," I held out my hand, empty. "Give me the leaf your scout took last night. It is false comfort anyway." He was quiet for the length of a small wave folding on stone. Then he drew a leather wallet from his belt, opened it, and took out a warped vellum corner with a raven stamp pressed pale by damp. The script on it was the same rune Latin hand that had stared up from my desk far from here. He handed it to me. "He will be clumsy again," he said. "I do not reward clumsiness." I tucked the piece away. "Learn to read wind and words in the same breath," I said, "and you'll make all the land you wish." On the flats, the grounded ship wriggled like a fish caught shallow. Men shifted weight. Oars bit water. Another dull thump as the companion keel found the same lip. The pilot beside Eirik drew a breath through his teeth and then let it out, the sound of a man admitting correction, without taking a wound from it. "They are light," I said. "The tide will lift them. The flats will let go. Nothing is lost but the hour." Eirik looked back toward the church. From within, distant chanting began, not loud enough to challenge anyone, only a thread of sound like smoke. "What is in your box?" he asked, with a small nod toward the reliquary I knew was already on a coracle, wrapped and firm. "A memory that steadies men," I answered. "A saint's bones, a story of courage. They are worth more to us than to you, because what feeds the heart is heavier than gold to a monk. You have your weight in other stores." He smiled then, thin and real. "And you have your words," he said. "Tell your bishop he bargains better than his kings. Tell him the sea teaches me too." He lifted his hand, palm out, and his men fell back as if tugged by a tide line. We stood together for one more minute while the longships wriggled, listed, then righted as the flood kissed them higher. The pilot shouted once, a curt shape of sound. Oars dipped. The prows eased off the bars with a long, smooth sigh. Eirik watched to be sure. He did not turn his back on the sea even when he turned from me. "Another day," he said. "No threat, a compass point." "Another day," I answered, "on deeper water." He went, feet soundless on stone. The raven banner unfurled once in a low puff, and then was gone down the path. I stood still while the last of his men left the cloister. Then I let my breath out and felt the slackness that comes after a knot is undone. Here Frith emerged from behind his pillar. He had the careful gait of a man whose legs wanted to run but to nowhere helpful. He pressed into my hand the rolled true-tide leaf. "You spoke like a clock speaks," he said, eyes wet behind his nearsighted squint, tick and calm. Bishop Higbald appeared at the door from the nave. Behind him, emptiness rang, a space that had recently held people and now held only sound. He looked older than he had at dawn. Leaders age by hours in times like this, not years. "They will come again," he said, not as fear, but as simple truth. "Yes," I said, "but you have time to learn new rhythms." I tucked the warped raven-stamped scrap beside the true tide leaf. "This ledger will guide no more keels today." Oswulf slid up from the causeway path like a piece of shore himself, feet wet, rope around his waist, hair slicked to his forehead. "All across," he murmured. "We'll go back for the last of the food and the tools when the flats cool again. No shouts, no blades." He offered a half smile that made the years in his face jump backward. "Your smoke spoke, Master Holmes." "The sea did most of the talking," I said. Light grew with the flood, and with it a long relief that didn't cheer so much as lower the shoulders. We moved in quiet. There was no victory to celebrate, only a gap in harm, and that is sometimes all the triumph the day allows. I stood at the edge of the cloister, watched the longships angle off their bars, and felt the ledger's ghost lighten. The tide rose. The danger fell away like a shadow, sliding back down the wall where it belongs. Chapter 10, in which quiet returns. By a hush channel, the island of Lindisfarne waited like a held breath. Low rock, caves that the sea had cut like careful letters into stone. We moved there by the hush channel that Oswulf knew in his bones and toes, a ribbon of deeper run between flats that will strand a man if he does not honor their patience. Oars hardly touched water, breath hardly lifted. Only the friendly scrape of wood and the soft slap of brine spoke for us. In a sea cave, candlelight warmed faces. The air smelled of salt and tallow and the cold mineral truth of rock. Bishop Higbald stood with the reliquary and laid his palm on its wood lid. He prayed, not like a man asking favors, but like a man thanking a friend for company. His voice was low. It ripened the cave walls into softer shapes. We took stock without rush. The Lindisfarne Gospels lay wrapped in wool and leather, safe as a sleeping child. Bread, salt fish, a jar of ink and a sack of spare quills, because Herefrith had refused to leave them. A rolled sheaf of parchment with a copy of the tide wheel, true one this time, bound and tucked into a basket so no clumsy hand would make an accident into an omen. Old men with their backs against rock, the curve of their spines smoothing as relief worked into them. A boy's ears pink with cold, a woman's hand around his fingers, Oswulf's toes flexing on stone, ground regained. I took out the raven-stamped fragment and the true tide leaf. In the candle's smooth face, their inks agreed like cousins, runes like angled teeth, Latin like a path between hedges. The circle of the tide rose honest and useful, no mirror trick in it. I held the false in one hand, the true in the other, and for a moment the cave held the weight of choices on paper. Brother Herefrith leaned in. "It is wicked clever," he said, "this ledger that speaks in two tongues. It looks like piety to us and reads like seams and sand to them. Whoever made it, he lives in the crossing." "He or they," I said. "A network, perhaps. Merchant eyes and monk hands. A man who traded at Dorestad and drank beer with boatmen on the same day he kissed a bishop's ring. The wax raven says Norse, but the hand that forms these Latin abbreviations learned them on the continent in a scriptoria that prides itself on neat minuscule. It is os magic, only work and motive." Bishop Higbold looked up from the reliquary. The candle picked out the lines of his face. "Motive?" he asked. "Profit," I said simply, "and the power that comes when you can move faster and surer than the other man. Longships make speed, knowledge makes aim. Someone braided the two. We cut one strand today." He nodded, and then, because he was a bishop of this island, not an abstract thinker who lived only in patterns, he asked the right next question. "What is our path forward?" "Write letters," I said, "to Jarrow, to Iona, to York. Tell them that raids come with charts, not just hunger, and that books need to move when the wind smells wrong. Keep copies of what matters with people who can carry them. Learn the tide like a psalm, and do not put all your heart in chests that are heavy to lift." I looked at Herefrith. "Make two of everything that can be copied. Keep one hidden somewhere no chest stands. Not just scripture, lists, tide. Who owes what to whom? Those are as valuable now as jeweled covers." Oswulf pressed his palm against the cave wall as if feeling the sea move through the rock itself. "The Hush Channel has cousins," he said quietly. "Tracks a coracle can slip down when men with shields cannot see the water change color. I can show them to your steadiest rowers. A few lines learned now will buy yards later." "Do it," Higbold said. "In daylight, in calm. Sing them if you must. Men remember songs." The boy with pink ears spoke, surprising himself. "I can remember songs," he said in the brave, flat way of children who propose without asking for praise. His mother laughed a little and put her palm on the top of his head. The laugh was a small, bright shell of sound. It made the cave feel less like a hiding place and more like the inside of a house on a rainy day. In the corner, Herefrith untied the cloth around Alcuin's last letter and handed it to me. "Read," he asked. "Your voice is like an oar in water when the boat needs it." The vellum was smooth from careful hands. Alcuin of York had written from Charlemagne's court, where minds were being sharpened and hearts stretched across borders. His script was tidy and balanced. I read aloud, the cave listening. "Is this the beginning of greater sorrow, or is it a prompt to greater wisdom? Lindisfarne, holy with the bones of Cuthbert, has learned that even saints sleep when men ignore the watch. Pray, but also build. Guard. Do not call luck a miracle, nor a warning an omen, and stop there. Answer warnings with work. The words lay down like stones you can step on. No hysteria, no rage. The kind of counsel that keeps breath steady when others gasp. Higbold closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with purpose. "We will do so," he said. "We will pray and we will plan." He looked at me with the gratitude of a man who has been given time, which is the rarest gift. "Who are you?" he asked again, as he had asked in our first meeting, when I was more shadow than man in his sight. "Snorelock Holmes," I said gently, "a watcher of currents, a mender of small, loud problems before they break into huge, quiet disasters. I folded Alcuin's letter. I sleep in one world to stand in another where help is needed. Then I wake again." He smiled with his eyes. "Then wake with our thanks," he said. Outside the cave, the sea worked its old lesson into the shore. It rose and fell, and in that rise and fall all timing is written if you know how to read it. We shared bread. Even simple chewing can be a liturgy after danger passes. Here Frith poured water. Oswulf ran his thumb along a rope and made a small adjustment, the kind that keeps a boat whole for one more season. I walked to the cave mouth. Across the flats, the longships had already found the outer line and slid into the formal channel. Eiric's banner showed black against a pale sky for a breath and then dipped out of sight. No curses carried to us, no threats, just the sound of competent men accepting that a day had misfired and choosing not to make the mistake larger. I admired that. It's easier to storm than to turn. Turning is a skill. Herefrith came to stand beside me. "Do we burn the ledger?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "We learn from it. We strip it of what it can teach our enemies and keep what it can teach us. Turn the trick outward. Knowledge does not belong to raiders or to monks alone. It belongs to whoever will use it to spare more pain. Copy its useful parts to warn others. Keep its dangerous parts with men like you who give ink to prudence. I touched the true tide leaf. And keep this safe. It belongs to this coast now, as warning and as map." He nodded and eased back into the cave. I stayed at the mouth and let the smell of kelp and cold stone fill my lungs. The arc of the day was clear now, and the danger that had stood like a guest who won't leave had finally pulled on its cloak and gone out into the weather. Fatigue settled into my knees like a soft sand. I accepted it. The body keeps honest books even when the mind is busy with ledgers of its own. The fog began to thin, not in a rush, but as if the air had remembered that it used to be transparent. The cave drip became a hearth's tick in my ears. I knew the signs. The dream gives you what you came for, and then it walks you gently back to your chair. I took one more look at the faces in the candlelight. Higbold's grave kindness, Herefrith's precise hands, Oswulf's patient competence, and then turned toward a different kind of dawn. The boat rocked once. The tide breathed. My eyes closed in the dream and opened in a room where rain whispered against leaded panes. My chair received me with a sigh any old friend would recognize. The weight of the blanket on my knees was familiar and welcome. Penelope the beagle snuffled from her basket, decided nothing required a beagle's attention, and sank back into sleep with a sigh like a small bellows. The birch tar scent lingered faintly in the air, a low reminder of resin on chests and pitch on oars. On the desk lay the same delivered vellum leaf that had started this case. Rune Latin script, clear as day, the tide rose drawn by a careful hand. Beside it, the pea-sized raven wax fragment waited, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that now made sense. My tide clock ticked, measured seconds with the soft competence of Oswulf's oars. Alcuin's letter rested under a paperweight shaped like a little brass longship, sort of gift people give a man who has written too many cases involving the sea. I smiled at the neatness. The waking world had its own order when you let it show you. I wrote a single note on a card. Lindisfarne, 793. Ledger, not prophecy. Warn Jarrow. Copy wisely. Teach tides. Then I laid the card under the raven wax chip, as if weight could make counsel sink deeper into the day. Outside, the rain eased, the kind of pause that asks you to listen to quieter things. And so we come to the final work of the night, which is no work at all. The wind-down hush settles like a good cloak. You are safe here. You didn't run across flats or steer a longship. You simply breathed while I took the edge off a morning that began sharp. Now the only currents that matter are the ones that carry you towards sleep. Listen. Rain patters on the glass, each drop its own soft footfall on a path that leads away from thought. It starts a little bright, then dims as it runs, joining a slower trickle on the sill. Somewhere, a gutter ticks, a rhythm that does not demand attention, only offers it if you want it. The tide clock on the mantle keeps its patient measure. The great hand moves slowly, slower than minutes, slower than your breath. Imagine it as a small boat's oar. Dip, pull, lift, feather. Repeat. There is comfort in repeating work that does not tire your arms. The room is warm and ordinary, which is the best kind of magic. Timber settles. The hearth gives a long, low creak as if it is exhaling. Books smell faintly of old paper and a little dust and the fingers that turned them once. A quill rests beside an ink pot, its tip clean and ready. It will not be needed tonight. There is no ledger to chase now, only the soft accounting of the body. A slow heart, lungs that open and close like doors to a garden, muscles loosening their careful knots. Outside, imagine the flats, wide, pale. The sea coming in with the gentlest intention, not to surprise, only to cover. Each ripple folds under the next. Curlews call once, twice, then fall silent. The sand holds a memory of footsteps and then lets it go. Even the places where keels kissed and stuck are smoothed by a hand you cannot see, a hand made of water and time. That hand is under you now, steady and generous. Take an easy breath in through your nose, as if drawing in the salt of a calm morning. Hold it for the length of a blink. Let it out slowly, as if laying down a bundle you carried without complaint, but no longer need. Repeat, each time softer, until the breath takes itself without your help. If thoughts arrive, let them arrive as boats at high tide. They can come and go without scraping. If a worry tries to build a dock, let the water be deeper than the worry counted on. Watch it float, drift, and then vanish into a simple horizon. Hear a single bell note in your mind, far away and low, an old iron tongue tapped once by a patient hand. It spreads, fades, and leaves the air sweeter for the passing. That is how sleep wants to find you, unsummoned, simple, aloud. Penelope shifts in her basket, a small rustle, then stillness. The room pauses with her, then continues its slow song rain clock breath. You are part of that song now because you are quiet too. Think of the people we met, if you like. Not their fear, not the press of time, only their steadiness. Brother Herefrith's careful script, Bishop Higbald's hand on a wooden lid, Oswulf's toes feeling depth that no eye can see, Eiric's measured look when he chose not to make the day worse. Each is an oarstroke in a long river of people doing what they can with the tools they have. That river carries you too, without asking you to row. Let your brow smooth, there is no need for it to think now. Let your jaw unclench. Your tongue can rest on the floor of your mouth. Your shoulders can fall a little lower. Your hands can be heavy and kind. Your legs can be logs at the edge of a tide pool, warm and still. The night leans in, not to demand, but to offer. It offers a sky you do not need to see to trust. It offers a blanket that keeps the same promise again and again, without fanfare. It offers a world that will go on turning without your opinion for a few hours. You can set down the day like a book with a ribbon in it. The story will be there when you want it again. If you listen closely, there is a hint of birch in the air still, a resin memory of a place where wood meets water meets work. Let that be your last shape of thought, something simple and useful and true. A boat is made, a tide is read. A friend sits beside a fire and says, "Rest," and so you rest. As you drift, know this, the mystery is solved for now. The innocent are safer than they were, and the ledger that might have guided harm instead taught us to guard. The sea turns, the clock ticks, you breathe. The rune grows softer around the edges. I am here, as always, at the calm center of other people's storms. Good night, dear friend. Let the tide carry you in. Sleep well.